What's up, people? So, this is a tier list I've been wanting to do for a long time, an MCU tier list. Back in when at the start of this year, I actually did a tier list for all the Phase 4 movies and shows that came out in 2021, and I'm planning to do a part 2 to that when this year is over. But there's like, wait, I have to also want to do the Infinity Saga. So I decided, let's just do a separate tier list entirely with all the Infinity Saga, just phases 1, 2, and 3. So from Iron Man all the way to Endgame or Far From Home. And and I think that's a fair way to do it right now, just because there are 23 movies to go through. So like there's already a lot. Uh, so yeah, I tend to ramble a lot, so I'm gonna try and keep it to a minimum because there's just so much to go through. Oh, but yeah, I'm one of those people who thinks the Infinity Saga is pretty darn good. Like there are, uh, actually, I would say a huge chunk of their movies are really, really good. And I said when I reviewed She-Hulk, I talked about how I actually wouldn't call any of the movies bad. Like there are a couple ones that haven't bothered rewatching that often, but even then, I don't think they're bad. I just think they're just not as good as they could have been. So yeah, no real misses here. I would say, hey, maybe a couple here and there, but we'll get to those eventually. But yeah, not much else to say. Let us begin. So actually, right off the bat, I'm gonna take Homecoming and Far From Home and put them in the good tier. Or so I've technically already talked about both those movies a lot. Like I did reviews on them. I had a Spider-Man tier list and I talked about those too. So I've already covered these movies a lot. And I'm just gonna put them in good right off the bat. If you want to know my thoughts, just click the card and all that. But yeah, and I also want to end this video on Endgame. So that's another reason. So, all right, let's actually begin. And I have all these movies in release order. Well, actually, no, let's put Infinity War right here. It just makes a lot of sense, right? But yeah, mostly in release order, and we're going to go through all of them as quickly as possible. Not make this video too long. So, with all the stalling out of the way, let us start with Iron Man. And yep, I do agree with the general public that Iron Man is really, really good. Pretty good, yeah. So it goes in the great tier. Or just obviously Robert Downey Jr. sold the movie, but and there's also the fact that he was had a pretty rough life. I've would I've and he was like perfect for this role because Tony Stark is going through some pretty nasty things before he redeems himself. So this is perfect for him. Also crazy to think that director Jon Favreau was sort of rushed with this movie. Like it had a rushed production, and yet Favreau made the best he could. It's really cool. And for a movie that came out over 10 years ago, the CGI still holds up. Like the Iron Man suit, like looks so much better than a lot of CGI we get in Marvel movies nowadays, which is pretty crazy. Like, thankfully, Jon Favreau is one of those directors who likes to use practical effects as well as CGI because he did that with The Mandalorian too, and it's really refreshing going back to this movie, seeing where it all started. It, and the villain is a little lame, but not much complaints here. And then we move on to the Incredible Hulk, which um is is decent. I think the Incredible Hulk's a decent movie. I haven't watched it that much, though. That's because it feels so disconnected from the MCU that I don't really want to rewatch it. Especially considering I'm so used to Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner that it's weird seeing Edward Norton. Like I have to register in my head. Wait, Edward Norton and Mark Ruffalo are playing the same character. But then we had stuff like Moon Knight and Werewolf by Night that feel disconnected from the MCU, yet but those are still really good, and the fact that they were disconnected actually worked in their advantage. So I try to look at Incredible Hulk in the same way. It's still not that good because, like, I did watch the Ang Lee Hulk movie, and that movie focuses so much on boring and just kind of sitting around and talking. This movie has the opposite problem where it focuses too much on action and not really that much character development. Like, it has a whole Bruce Banner arc about seeing the Hulk as a disease at first and then seeing him as a weapon that he can use, but the way he gets from here to there, you don't really feel it. Like, it doesn't feel earned. But some of the fight scenes are still pretty cool, especially the scene at the university where he's fighting Emil Blonsky when he's still a human. And yeah, uh, it's a decent movie. I'm not rewatching it anytime soon, but it's not bad, thankfully. On Iron Man 2, which also had a rough production, just like the first one, or rushed, but unfortunately, Favreau couldn't really save it. So I would put Iron Man 2 in decent. Now, I actually still really enjoyed this movie. Like, I was rewatching it, all the MCU movies, just to prepare for this tier list. Iron Man 2, I actually enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would. Like, it still has, the Tony Stark charm, and like like also the CGI still holds up again over 10 years later. And also I like Black Widow and more Nick Fury too, and it was cool seeing Rhodey become War Machine. Oh, and also Sam Rockwell's fun. But yeah, it does have issues where it feels like there's way too much going on. There's not much action, and it does focus a little too hard on trying to set up Avengers to the point where it feels less like a continuation of the first one and more like a bridge movie to get from Iron Man to Avengers, which is a bit of a shame. On to Thor, which Thor is one of those movies that honestly gets better and better every time I watch it. I'm gonna put in good. So the thing, when I first watched Thor, I just kind of saw it as, oh, it's his introduction movie to set him up for Avengers. But rewatching it, it's actually a lot better than I thought it was. Like, it's not just Thor's intro. Actually it's one of Thor's more interesting movies. Is something I've noticed about Thor is that I've always been interested in his character when his powers are taken away, and that's the case here. He disrespects his father, seeks war instead of peace. He loses his powers and he has to learn how to get them back. And I found that really interesting, seeing him learn what it means to be king. But Loki is still a lot more interesting. Just Loki's a really cool villain. Everybody's already said that. And yeah, Thor's pretty good. And it's definitely, again, a lot better on rewatches. On to Captain America, the First Avenger, which for me, I would put this in great. A, and yeah, Captain America is really good. Just it is a little risky trying to make a movie about him because before people were saying Captain America was too goody two shoes and too like perfect, but this movie gave him a little bit more humanity. I feel like Chris Evans brought a lot of like, again, humility to his character that made me want to root for him. And like, he doesn't get the super soldier serum until like 40-50 minutes in, and I like that. Spend a lot of time with him as skinny, like really understand why he is the perfect man for the serum. Um, and it's cool seeing some of World War II. I wish they would have focused on it more, but it's still a fun movie. Oh, and also it's got Hugo Weaving, which, come on, who doesn't love Hugo Weaving? And then for the conclusion of Phase 1, we of course have the Avengers. And if I grab the Avengers. Oh, yeah, I did grab it. Yep, Avengers. Yep, it's in great tier. Yep, it's my favorite Phase 1 movie. Yep. So, unlike Phase 4, where the finale is Black Panther 2 for some reason, like, are we sure this is culminating everything that's been built up? The Avengers is the culmination of Phase 1. All these movies have been building up to these characters coming together and fighting evil, and it is super satisfying. But everybody's also said it, but Avengers also works as a standalone movie. Honestly, the only movies I feel like you probably do need to see beforehand is Thor. But other than that, uh, it works really well on its own, and it is one of the most rewatchable out of all of them. I've seen it a lot because it is so entertaining. There's a lot of like slowly building up, and then of course the Battle of New York is freaking cool. Well, and I know people hate Joss Whedon now, which understandable, but if there's one thing you can give Joss Whedon, it's that he is a talented filmmaker. At least when he has directorial control to do what he wants instead of just ruining somebody else's movie. And yeah, he created something special here. So now we have moving on to phase 2 with Iron Man 3, which I'll put this in good. A lot of people for some reason really don't like Iron Man 3, and yeah, it's not great. Yeah. And the whole Mandarin twist is really weird, but I don't know. I think Iron Man 3 is actually pretty solid. Like, I know there's the complaint about he's not in the suit very often, but that didn't really bother me. Just I found myself really enjoying it, and also, yeah, obviously the lesson of the suit is not Iron Man. Tony Stark is Iron Man, and like that's a great message and all that. And also, a lot of people say that the movie ends with him stop being Iron Man, but then you go to Age of Ultron and he's suddenly Iron Man again. But like, he wasn't retiring; he was just starting over. That's all it meant when it's called the clean slate protocol. He's starting over. He's not retiring as Iron Man. It's that simple. All right, on to Thor: The Dark World. Everybody regards it. Well, most people regard it as the worst one. It's not. For me, Dark World is indecent. I actually think Dark World is slightly better than Incredible Hulk. When I was watching it to prepare for Love and Thunder, it's definitely a little boring, and because the story isn't that interesting. And remember when I said what made Thor 1 really good was that because Thor's powers were taken away, it's super satisfying seeing him getting it back. Go to Dark World, and that's thrown out the window. Now Thor is just all powerful, and I never fear for him when he's in a fight. I always think, oh, he's got this. Like, he's not that interesting when he has his powers. Like, I just don't care. And Jane Foster just feels like a plot device too, with the Infinity Stone in her. But is it bad? No. Loki again saves the movie for me. Just his pretty much every scene with him. I always find his scenes compelling when he's talking to his mother, when he's talking to Thor, and even the sacrifice in quotes at the end was like, oh, that's really cool. Well, so, and I guess I'd rewatch it when I'm going through the MCU movies again, but yeah, it's just not good. All right, now we move on to Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which, in my opinion, is the best solo movie out of all the MCU films. Just Winter Soldier is so good, man. And I already liked Captain America beforehand, but Winter Soldier just made him even cooler. This is the first one with Anthony and Joe Russo directing, and they were the right guys for this. Like, again, the fight scenes are cool. Well, and I also really enjoy seeing in kind of Steve's arc where he is blindly trusting the government like he did in the first one, but before he realizes no, they can be corrupt, setting his story up for civil war. And obviously his whole thing with Bucky trying to get through to him when he finds out he's the Winter Soldier, just brainwashed. It's like it is so cool. Well, and also Henry Jackman did the music, and I honestly think it's underrated too. Um, what else with Winter Soldier? And Falcon's introduced in there, and he just gets better and better in every movie, and he's really cool here too. So yeah, everybody's already talked about it, but Winter Soldier is really good, guys. Now on to Guardians of the Galaxy, which it's a James Gunn movie, and I think that automatically makes it great. I feel like so. Yeah, actually, is it? Yeah, let's put it in S tier. Here, just yeah, obviously it's awesome seeing these characters nobody knew about. Like James Gunn makes you root for them and care about them. Now everybody knows who Star Lord and Groot are, but what this movie does so well is like uh, build these like understandable motivations between these characters and why they would want to come together. And Peter Quill is obviously the heart and soul of the movie, of the team too, with his relationship with his mother and finally growing past her death. Just it's really cool. Well, I'm saying that word a lot, but I don't care that much. And what else with this one? And the soundtrack. That's another thing. Yeah, the soundtrack is really cool too. Just yeah, not much else to say. Guardians 1 is really awesome. So, on to Avengers Age of Ultron, which I would put in a good tier past the two Spider-Man movies. So, with Age of Ultron, on yeah, it's definitely not quite as good as the first one, on where there is definitely a little bit missing there, but I still think Age of Ultron's a good time. Because there are some really good scenes, uh, like you have this whole everything at the farm is really interesting, and where the characters like talk and like you really discover more of what makes them unique and all that. And oh, and the dreams too. When Wanda gives the characters their dreams, like that shows who they are. Like when with Tony being scared of Thanos coming, Steve wishing he could be with Peggy, and Natasha, like with her pretty dark past and all that. And so there's a lot of character introspection here. And Ultron's pretty interesting too. I mean, maybe he's a little weird with the way they made him all quippy because it's a Joss Whedon movie. Every character has to have a quippy line, but I found Ultron interesting. And other than that, and what else? Yeah, the action's cool. Just it's still an enjoyable movie. On to Ant Man, which Ant Man is decent. I think I'll put it here. It's definitely better than these because it's a more consistently fun movie. The fact that they're able to take a character shrinking down into a smaller character into actually a pretty fun movie that you can actually take somewhat seriously is kind of a testament to the writing. But other than and Luis is funny too. And I've also heard the praise that it's refreshing how much smaller the stakes are after a lot of world-ending threats, and I'm like, yeah, that definitely brings it up a little. But I don't know, just something about it doesn't quite click for me to put it into good tier, and it's one of the ones I find myself rewatching the least. But here's one of the better ones, Captain America Civil War, which might be actually no, but it's close to my favorite MCU movie. He just Civil War is so good, guys. Like obviously it's great seeing Steve actually, defend his right, like, hey, like governments can be corrupt. We shouldn't be trusting them. We shouldn't submit to them. And Tony, after what happened with Ultron, is like, no, we should support them. We should uh, uh, be put in check and all that. And just obviously the airport fight is awesome. But what makes this movie really good, and one of the best ones, is obviously the ending fight where Tony finds out that Bucky killed his parents, and he finds out Steve lied to him, which is insane. And like you can understand why Tony would get angry in that scene. And the Avengers are split apart. And also, I've heard some people say this movie doesn't have stakes because no character dies. Like I get so annoyed by that. Like especially after Infinity War came out. Like guys, Steve and Tony's friendship in Civil War was broken. They don't interact at all in Infinity War, and because of that, Thanos won. Like Civil War was not a pointless movie. I can't like. Are there some people that still think it is? Because after Infinity War, it's like I just laugh. Like, come on, like there were stakes in that movie. So yeah, with that out of the way, moving on. Here's a Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange is pretty good. Um, actually, yeah, I'd put it right there in between Thor and Homecoming thing. So Um, the weird thing about Doctor Strange is that the character himself is fine, I guess, but the side characters I find even more interesting. You know, Mordo with the way he blindly trusts the Ancient One before finding out she's not that great, and Ancient One obviously Wong is hilarious, and oh, and even the villain Caecilius I actually find fascinating with the way he would talk about Dormammu is our salvation. We have to submit to him, and it's like that's kind of messed up, dude. But you can at least understand where he's coming from. And obviously the the CGI in this is crazy, especially during the mirror dimension scenes and the whole scene when they turn back time. It's like insane how good it looks. So yeah, onto Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which for some reason I've seen some people put it lower, but I'm one of those people who actually thinks Guardians 2 is better than the first one. Just a tad better. Just if Gunn was maybe he was held back a little on the first one because man with Volume 2, James Gunn just did whatever he want with these characters and took them to the next level, and it's really good, guys. Just Star Lord's arc with him and his dad, and Ego is interesting, and Gamora and Nebula finally coming together with as sisters, and Drax, I think, finding love with Mantis or something like that with her, and Rocket and Yondu being hard on the outside but having a soft heart in the inside. And obviously Yondu's death is a tearjerker. Or just there's just yeah, Guardians 2 does have the issue of the plot, like the pacing is a little wonky. With it takes a lot longer to get going, but just the highs it reaches, the emotional highs, I'm just like, for me, just make it better than the first one. Now we go on to Thor Ragnarok, which I will put it up here. Yep, Ragnarok's easily my favorite Thor movie. So, like I said, what made Thor interesting in the first one was that his powers were taken away, and that's what made Dark World less interesting. But thankfully, Ragnarok brought it back when Thor throws Mjolnir at Hela, and then she destroys it. And again, I'm rooting for Thor. I love seeing him struggle to figure out what his powers are. Like or like Odin telling him like, "Are you Thor, the god of hammers?" And Thor saying, "I'm not stronger than you." Oh wait, no, I'm not as strong as you. And then Odin says, "No, you're stronger." And again, it's a lot more satisfying seeing Thor actually earn his powers at the end for me. And also the fact that he's a lot more comedic, like allow Chris Hemsworth to show more of his range is really fun. And yeah, there's a lot to love with Ragnarok. Like more Hulk is fun, more Loki is fun. Hela is not a great villain, but I think she's cool. I mean, she's played by Kate Blanchett. It and oh, and also Korg's in it, which is an obvious win. And now we go on to Black Panther, and I'll put Black Panther in great. I'm one. So I know there are two. I think there are two camps of Black Panther. Some say it's really, really good, but some just don't, are just kind of like, it's okay. I'm one of those people who thinks Black Panther is really good. Just, I mean, first of all, it's directed by Ryan Coogler, and his movies are always good. Just seeing T'Challa find out that his father's made some pretty messed up mistakes, like leaving a boy at that place, and then that boy grows into wants revenge and wants to help all the black people all around. And again, like everybody's talked about, but Killmonger is one of the most sympathetic villains, where you understand why he would want to do this. And what makes it better is that he actually changes T'Challa's mind and T'Challa tries to make Wakanda a better place, which is so refreshing for an MCU movie, that he doesn't just die. I With his goal finished, he actually sort of completes it, just not the way he thought he would. And my only complaint is that the CGI isn't great, especially in the finale when the two are fighting. It's just like, yeah, CGI looks really bad there, but oh well, it's still fun. And I can't wait for Wakanda Forever. I'm hoping it's gonna be good. So now we move on to Ant-Man and the Wasp, which similar feelings with the first Ant-Man. It's not quite as good as the first one, but it's also like same feelings as the first Ant-Man, where yeah, it's just kind of like it's a fun movie, and it's definitely important for because it explains the quantum realm and like tells you what you need to know going into Endgame. Like in that sense, it's an important movie. But when I'm watching all all marathoning all these, I just kind of skip this one. But at least it has a little bit of Luis in it, and Owen Randall Park is fun too. You know, so then we have Captain Marvel, which for me, with all the Infinity Saga films, Captain Marvel is my least favorite. We're in the below average. Weirdly, when I first saw it, I really enjoyed it, though I think that was because it was around the Endgame hype, and I was just so hyped for that I sort of saw this movie as good for some reason. I'm still not sure why, but then I look back on it, and it's like, wait, it's not that good. In fact, it's has a lot of problems, as you know, with what with like the message of Carol Danvers having to man, it's hard to remember what the message is. Like I remember one YouTuber talked about there's a theme in there, but the movie doesn't really focus on it too much. I can't remember what it is now. Ah, that should tell you something. And and yeah, she's just not that interesting and way too powerful. Like you can see why they didn't have much screen time for an end game, because she's way too powerful. But other than that, there are some positives here. Like I like seeing a younger Nick Fury, and the Skrulls are really interesting too. Like I'm more excited to see the Skrulls than I am excited to see more of Captain Marvel. Oh, I'm looking forward to Secret Invasion because of this movie. So at least there's that. So there are some good things, but is out of all of these movies, it's my least favorite. It's not my least favorite MCU movie now because Eternals and Black Widow have come out, but it's just not that good. All right, now we get on to the two final movies. Of course, starting with Avengers Infinity War, which, in my opinion, is the best MCU movie. And so far, it hasn't been topped. Uh, Infinity War is insanely impressive of a feat. Just, they take like 50 characters. They don't really have too much screen, they don't really have too much character development, but they're able to distribute them amongst the runtime. Like this characters goes on this team and all that, and it feels like you should be overwhelmed. Like this is too much going on, but the pacing and the writing is done so well to the point where I don't feel overwhelmed and I'm able to follow the story perfectly fine. Oh, and but of course, the Russos have said that Thanos is the main character, and I can see how because he has the most character development with throwing Gamora off the cliff if is a part of that, and obviously he has the understandable motivation, even though his logic is super flawed, and the ending is just insanely insane. Yeah, that's a sentence, and it was really painful having to wait a whole year for the next movie, but that's what we had to do. Oh, so yeah, I'm like people watching these movies after Endgame were super lucky. And speaking of that, Avengers Endgame, we're and Endgame is one of those movies where I mean, yeah, there's some problems you could point out. There's some plot details that don't really make much sense. I mean, some of the time travel things are a little questionable. I would say mostly with Steve returning all the Infinity Stones, there are a lot of questions there. But is it a bad movie? No. In fact, in my opinion, Endgame is my third favorite movie. Not quite as good as Civil War and Infinity War, but Endgame is one of the most satisfying movies to watch. Like something I've noticed is that the endings of a film or a franchise will always make me feel the most, and that is the case here. Like seeing all of these setups from previous movies getting paid off, uh, like Natasha sacrifice is sad and set up to pay off. Well, there's Thor going from Ragnarok to Infinity War to Endgame, seeing how broken he is, losing everything, and then finally gathering the courage to fight again. And like how I mentioned, because Thor loses, he becomes more interesting. And then you also have Tony Stark finally becoming the hero that we all thought he would, and like even getting a daughter and sacrificing himself to save the whole universe, and Steve Rogers wanting to be with Peggy, wanting to be at that dance, and then finally getting the chance to, which I never thought he would. But there you go. There you go. And what else? I guess the only other one I can think of is Nebula with it finally becoming a better person and moving on from getting revenge on Thanos. And and obviously you have the fan servicey moments that I just can't help but smirk at. You know, when Steve lifts the hammer and when all the portals come in and he screams "Avengers Assemble!" Like those moments are still really cool all these years later. So, yep. Despite not being the best MCU movie, Endgame is fantastic, and it still is, at least to me. So, yep, that is my tier list for the Infinity Saga. Uh, so I think I've said all that I've needed to say, and I guess tune in next time for when I go back to making a part 2 video of my Phase 4 tier list video, which it's going to be interesting. I'll just say that. So